Iran has achieved a great victory and forced the criminal America to accept its 10-point plan, in which America fundamentally commits to non-aggression, Iran's continued control over the Strait of Hormuz, acceptance of enrichment, lifting all primary and secondary sanctions, paying compensation to Iran, withdrawal of American combat forces from the region, and cessation of war on all fronts.
After 6 weeks of fighting which killed thousands in the Middle East and multiple deadlines to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or else, Donald Trump posted this just hours after threatening to wipe out Iran as a civilization. He says, "I agree to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. This will be a double-sided ceasefire. The reason for doing so is that we have already met and exceeded all military objectives and are very far along with a definitive agreement concerning long-term peace with Iran and believe it is a workable basis on which to negotiate." In Iran's capital, many say they are skeptical the ceasefire will hold.
The other side is not reliable. They only stick to agreements when they feel they are under firm and official pressure in international forums and have no choice. Otherwise, their statements and promises are not trustworthy at all.
I can't say that I am fully for or against it, but what matters is that the conditions we set were ultimately accepted, and that has made our people happy.
Pakistan has invited the US and Iran to meet for talks in Islamabad later this week. Iran's delegation will be led by Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf. Pakistan says these talks could lead to sustainable peace. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera.
Well, we have a team of correspondents around the world covering the latest developments in Sidon in Lebanon, Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, Kuwait City, Islamabad, Pakistan, Washington, D.C., and, of course, the Iranian capital, Tehran. And that's where we begin with Ali Hashem. Ali, tell us about the reaction there. What are ordinary Iranians saying about the ceasefire, and what are their expectations?
Well, fully, the ordinary Iranians are happy that this episode came to an end, or let me say a relative end. However, this is a kind of a cautious optimism, given the fact this is not an end of war. This is not peace. It's a ceasefire, and it's also followed by negotiations. And it seems that Iranians now have some sensitivity with negotiations, because in the past two experiences, negotiations were followed by wars. So this is the main issue. However, in general, people are welcoming this ceasefire. We saw them this dawn coming to the streets, celebrating in the streets. Actually, they were in the streets, but they started celebrating in the streets this, what they described as achievement, because it came with an end, and it came after a very harsh threat by President Trump to destroy the country, as he said, to destroy the civilization, to wipe it off. So for them, this was a good exit from the situation they were in for the past 40 days of daily destruction.
So we have now a ceasefire, a temporary one. Negotiations are due to begin in Islamabad on Friday, Ali. Talk to us about who will be leading the Iranian delegation there, and what will they be putting on the table?
Well, there's a lot of speculations over who will lead the talks. However, in general, names are being circulating. ISNA, which is a semi-official news agency, said Mohammad Bakr Ghalibaf is going to lead the team. This is logical given the fact his name was circulating in the past, but given the fact that there are several institutions within the establishment here in Iran involved in the policy making, in the negotiation, and given the fact also that this negotiations will have its own technical layer, there will be need to have experts in the team. So such a team will have a political figure, maybe Mr. Ghalibaf as expected. Of course, the foreign ministry should be there. Foreign Minister Araghchi could be among the, he should be actually, because he's the head of diplomacy, and the Supreme National Security Council. Now, this depends on who will represent this council, given the fact the security measures surrounding his secretary, Mr. Zulqadr. So, yes, a lot of speculations. Yeah, while what's on the table is the 10 points proposal that President Trump said is a good basis for negotiations, and that include the comprehensive end of a war on all fronts, from Lebanon to Iran to Yemen to Iraq. Also, Iran getting compensation for the destruction, a new protocol for the Strait of Hormuz, which is something that arose after this war, and also lifting all sanctions, Iran's guarantees to the world that it will not seek a nuclear bomb, and many other points that are mentioned within the 10 points list.
Okay, thank you for that, Ali Hashem. In Tehran, as we look at the 10 points that the Iranians have put forward, number 3 is the acceptance of enrichment in Iran's nuclear program. Another point is the removal of all primary sanctions, the removal of all secondary sanctions as well, the end of all UN Security Council resolutions against Iran, and the end of all of the Board of Governors resolutions against Iran as well. The compensation payments to Iran are also on the table, the withdrawal of U.S. combat forces from the region, and finally, the 10th point is a ceasefire on all fronts, including against the Islamic resistance of Lebanon, the Iranians say. These points will be up for discussion in Islamabad, where we now find our correspondent Kamal Haider. Kamal, all eyes now on the Pakistani capital. What preparations are being made there ahead of Friday's negotiations?
Indeed, all eyes are on Islamabad. The Iranian delegation is due to arrive within the next 24 hours, just before Friday, so that those talks can start taking place here in Islamabad. This, of course, happening after frantic diplomatic efforts by Pakistan, supported by friendly countries like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Qatar, that has led to this kind of a breakthrough. Of course, also with Chinese support, as the U.S. President mentioned. But it will be important to see what kind of concessions both sides are willing to give to each other in order to make sure that the issue is resolved. Although there is skepticism in Iran that these talks may end up like what they did when Oman was negotiating, it is also not clear whether they will be negotiating directly face-to-face across the table, or they will be going through the intermediary, which is Pakistan, the same modality that happened in Oman. But a sigh of relief, momentary relief, and some skepticism, given the fact that there is a wide gulf and trust deficit when it comes to Washington and Tehran.
Thank you very much for that. That's our correspondent in Islamabad, Kamal Haider. Let's head over to Washington, D.C. now. Rosalind Jordan is there. Rosalind, what are the expectations in Washington as far as these negotiations in Islamabad, and who on the U.S. side will be attending?
Well, it's thought that in addition to the president's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who's been involved in a lot of international crises, the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who has been taking part in these negotiations, as well as in the recent talks to bring about a ceasefire in the Gaza war. It is expected that the Vice President, J.D. Vance, will be joining and leading the delegation. Now, what are the expectations? That's really anyone's guess. Even though the U.S. President, Donald Trump, has said that he was willing to accept the 10-point plan as a starting point for discussions, and was willing to observe a 2-week-long ceasefire so long as traffic is allowed through the Strait of Hormuz, both military and commercial traffic. It does not mean that Iran's 10 points of discussion are going to be accepted, particularly when you look at ending all sanctions on the Iranian government, allowing it to retain control of its nuclear material all things that the Trump administration, both in its current form and in its previous administration, have vigorously fought against. There are also questions about compensation. There has not been any such discussion before by the Trump administration. In fact, the Trump administration had gone out of its way to criticize the Obama administration for returning to the Iranian treasury some $2 billion that had been held in escrow here in the United States as part of dealing with the Iran nuclear deal of 2015. Trump had criticized that as essentially the U.S. giving away money, even though these were Iranian funds. Compensation, some could argue, would look like the same thing, if not worse. And already the Trump administration has established a bit of a precedent when it comes to allowing traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, because it lifted sanctions on Iranian vessels that were already deployed in the Strait, in the Gulf, and to go through for 30 days, just so that it could open up the logjam of traffic in the area. So it's going to be very delicate. It's going to be very difficult. And I would imagine the president's going to get some political pressure here in Washington as his team tries to work out a longer ceasefire beyond the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, some very complex negotiations lie ahead, no doubt. Rosalind Jordan in